That's my typo. That was it. Yeah, it doesn't go to verse 48. How many of you are thrill seekers, incredible risk takers? DP, I know you are. Handful of us? A couple of us? How many people are good at heeding warnings? You read the warning labels on everything. We got a bunch of thumbs down, a couple yes. Isn't that interesting? Some of us yes, some of us no. I'm kind of in between, I guess. When I started driving truck, I started heeding warnings a little bit closer, but still probably not as much as I should have. But back in the day when I drove, like if I saw warning bad weather ahead, I'd be like, cool. And then I'd just go for it, you know. Got caught in a really bad blizzard one year. I was driving down to Arkansas. I was 16 years old. And I had no idea, actually, that a blizzard was coming. I had heard some murmurings of a storm, but didn't really pay much attention, didn't bother to watch the weather. And I took off, and as soon as I got on the turnpike at Somerset, it started to come down. And it snowed the entire way till I got halfway to Louisville, Kentucky. And then finally the snow tapered off. But it took me, that's a 14-hour trip if you make pretty good ground. And I think that trip ended up taking me something like 19 or 20 hours. Not really the greatest at heeding warnings. But what's interesting is Jesus gave his disciples and gave really all of his listeners tons of warnings as he was entering Jerusalem for the last time. In Luke records a bunch of these warnings that Jesus gives to people. Starting in, well, it probably starts even before that, but chapter 20, Jesus is warning people to beware of the scribes. These scribes are going to come, they're going to teach these different things, be aware of them, they're going to devour people. Then he foretells the destruction of the temple. That's a pretty big deal, something that I think should cause people to pay attention. We know that most people didn't. He foretells of wars and persecution. He's saying all these things are going to happen soon. He's warning people. And then he foretells the destruction of Jerusalem itself. Not just the temple, but the whole city is going to be demolished. Then he goes on and he tells them our few verses that Chaser had this morning, talking about watching yourself, that there are going to be all these things in life that are going to happen, that you need to pay attention, you need to be alert. I went on a campaign trip several years ago. I don't even remember when this was. This was a long time ago. I'm going to show you some pictures of this because it's just kind of silly. But we went to Germany and Switzerland. It was my first trip overseas. We took a group from Harding, and I went with my brother Chris and then a bunch of other friends. And we were warned about sleeping in these youth hostels. Has anybody ever slept in a youth hostel in another country? Here? Not in another country. Well, it's probably more of the same. They're not the cleanest. It's basically like a dorm room for adults. They're not the greatest. So we went to Germany and Switzerland, and we were warned to always keep things locked up, and that there were thieves that came in. Some of the same warnings that Jesus gives to people. You know, thieves come in the middle of the night, right, and they steal things away. We were told to keep our doors locked at all times. Well, being a group of young college kids, we didn't heed that warning very well. So when we went to bedtime, it looked kind of like this. That's my brother Chris. This was his nightly ritual. He had a picture of his girlfriend at the time, and he would stare in bed. Now, he was being dramatic and just being silly, but he would stare at his girlfriend every night before bed, and he would talk to the picture. But it wasn't just bedtime. He would do it on the mountains, and he would whisper sweet nothings to his girlfriend in the mountains of the Swiss Alps. And sometimes he would get weird, and he would look at me with these bizarre eyes. We were on a train at this point, and I have no idea what we were doing, but we posed for the cameras. But we would stare at the mountains, right? It was this beautiful, carefree trip. We had this group of college kids. This is one of the guys that went on the trip with us. This is, yes, a real picture from that trip. And it was kind of surreal, right? Because we grew up in the hills of Pennsylvania. We never knew what mountains looked like until we went there. It was absolutely gorgeous, breathtakingly gorgeous. And you get caught up in this because it's this group of Christians. We're all together. We all have one purpose. We were there as a singing group. So we went and we would sing on the street corners. And you know how people are kind of turned off by the street evangelists around here, people that preach on the corner, and it's usually hellfire and brimstone. We cringe whenever we see street preachers here. But in Germany and Switzerland, if you're singing, people are very receptive to the gospel. They're drawn into that. So we went as a singing group, and we would just stand on corners and sing in these big cities. And then people would be interested, and we'd get a crowd really quickly. And then we'd hand out these, they were like brochures. I have the German word in my mind, but they're these brochures that would tell people about a gospel meeting. And people were really receptive to it. But we got caught up in this, right? And we let our guard down. We didn't heed the warnings. There's my brother Chris doing Forrest Gump, looking out at the mountains. He loves the camera. There we were, trying to be rough and tough. We took the warnings a little bit seriously, and we were going to dress tough and go into the streets, but we ended up not purchasing these. But do what? What was I doing? I was looking bad, man. I was flexing my back muscles. So, lo and behold, the one night, we wake up early in the morning at the youth hostel, and every one of our wallets had been picked through and was empty. It's not the best feeling in the world when you're sleeping knowing that somebody was in your room and that none of you woke up, and our clothes, we took our clothes off and laid them right beside the bed. So whoever this was, whoever the thief was, not only broke into our room, but was literally inches from us as he was stealing all the money from our wallets. So the next night we got smart, and we took bottles, glass bottles, and we propped them up against the door. We thought we were smart. So we prop all these bottles up against the door, and we left it unlocked on purpose because we wanted to catch the guy. So the next morning we wake up, and all of our wallets were empty. And the glass bottles were still propped up against the door. So now we're really confused, and we're thinking maybe it's one of our own people who's stealing the money. Well, come to find out that our room was a suite, and they came in through the other room with more of our group. They stole their stuff, came through the bathroom, stole our money out of our wallets, and then went back out. How they knew that there were glass bottles up against our door, I'll never know. So then those guys got really smart, and they put a wallet on a table in the middle of the room, and they were keeping watch all night. They always had somebody who was awake. And so the thief, sure enough, came in on night number 3, and it was our friend Jamie. He grabbed the guy. He jumped up right away, waited till he got right to the wallet, and then he grabbed the guy, and the guy was able to get away. He slipped out of the hold and got away, so we never did actually catch him. But it was crazy, right? We didn't heed the warnings. And Jesus is constantly warning his disciples, and there are the same warnings for us today. This is the section that was read for us this morning. He says, "But watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth." That's a pretty powerful, pretty straightforward message, isn't it? He's not saying like, some of you are gonna find this day where you're just entrapped. Some of you are gonna find a day where You're going to blink your eyes and you're going to be like, how did I get here? Rather, he says, it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. That's pretty radical. That's a radical thing to say, that every single one of you are going to have this day where you're going to look and you're going to say, holy cow, how did this trap come upon me? How did I get here? And he's specifically talking about being weighed down by the weights of the world. You ever feel weighed down? Kind of a rhetorical question, right? Do you go back to the college days and you're like, man, those were the days? I do. I look back and I'm like, those days were carefree. There wasn't much to worry about back then. And you look now, and a lot of us are feeling this increasing pressure, this increasing weight, these increasing burdens. And Jesus is saying, watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. For it will come upon all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. And every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out, lodged on the mount called Olivet. And early in the morning, all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. In a couple weeks, we're going to celebrate Easter. It's the resurrection of Christ, but we've got to remember that before Jesus was raised from the dead, he died. He had been warning people and warning people and warning people, telling them that he was going to die, telling them that he was going to raise up on the third day, and they didn't hear the warnings. They didn't heed the warnings. And I think as we think through this, and we're equipping people to be servants, equipping people to minister to other people, we've also got to warn people. We've got to warn each other. Stay awake. Stay alert. There are thieves who come into our lives. There are traps. There are tons of things that will entrap us. Tons of worries. And guys, trust me, there are a lot of worries in this life. There is a lot to worry about. And if we get caught up in all those worries, they become consuming. If you don't take time to rest, if you don't pay attention, if you don't have self-awareness to know that you're being entrapped, that you're getting sucked into all these cares and all these worries and all these troubles, before you know it, it can be too late. So Jesus is warning people, and ultimately what he's saying is, you need to be prepared to stand before the Son of Man. What's he talking about? He's talking about Judgment Day. You need to be prepared and equip each other and prepare each other. Stay awake, stay alert. Because one day you're going to stand before Christ himself. So ultimately, are you prepared? Are you prepared today to stand before Jesus? It's a pretty heavy question. And as Luke records it, one of the very next things that happens, actually the very next thing that happens is this plot to kill Jesus. That's 2 verses. And then the very next verse, verse 3 in chapter 22, says this. Then Satan entered into Judas called Iscariot, who was of the number of the 12. Bet the other 11 didn't see that coming. I bet Judas didn't see that coming. I don't think Judas followed Jesus, left everything to follow him for 3 years throughout his ministry, saying, one day I'm going to betray you and hand you over to be killed. I don't think Judas went into ministry as one of the 12 apostles, saying, one day I'm going to kill this man. Jesus is warning people right before it plays out. Verse 4, he went away, that is Judas, he went away and conferred with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented and sought an opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of a crowd. Do you ever step back and just wonder, how did Judas get here? How did he get to this point? How did his heart get so dark, so hard, so broken, so evil? To be able to follow through with this, to be able to carry this out. I can tell you how, because Jesus told us in these verses. He wasn't keeping watch. He wasn't paying attention. He wasn't aware. He wasn't praying. He wasn't staying awake. He wasn't alert. He didn't keep watch. And then Satan entered into Judas. Jesus has given a really strong warning here, and I think we need to give that same warning to each other. We need to let our kids know the seriousness of it too. I mean, in life, there are going to be all kinds of things that weigh us down. Don't get caught up in it. Don't get caught up in all these things that bleed you dry. All the complaints. Guys, if you entertain complaints, we were talking about that in class this morning. If you entertain people's complaints, if you become the complaint department for people, I promise you, you will have a full-time and a half job at a bare minimum. If all you do is listen to people who complain, you'll find yourself completely depleted, exhausted, discouraged, losing hope. You'll find yourself in that place pretty quickly. So Jesus says, be alert, be aware, pay attention. Other places, he says the thief comes in and he sneaks in the middle of the night. We experienced it. I experienced it one time, and I never want to experience that again. It's violating. It's scary. We didn't know if this dude had a weapon. All we know is he was inches from us. Could have easily taken any one of our lives. And we would have never known it. Jesus says, pay attention, be aware, be alert. Incidentally, when they're in the garden and Jesus' blood, or his sweat becomes like blood because he was so weighed down with grief, what does he tell his disciples? They fall asleep, and he says, get up and pray so that you don't fall into temptation. It's kind of a fascinating thing to say to people in the middle of this traumatic grief. What are they going to be tempted to do? Do you ever think about that? We think about temptations, and we think about all kinds of things. Gluttony. We think about gossip. We think about sexual sins. We think about all kinds of things when we think temptations. What are they going to be tempted to do? Why is he waking them up in the middle of this traumatic event, hours before he dies, saying, get up and pray so you don't fall into temptation? I think it's exactly this. I think it's what he had just warned them of. There's this temptation to not pay attention, to not be aware, and to fall into these traps, to get sucked into these traps, to be roped in, and to betray people you love. And he's warning them, pay attention, stay alert. This week as you go out, pay attention, be aware. Don't get caught up in all the weight of the heaviness of life. Take time to rest. Take time to walk out, hike. This week is going to be beautiful weather. Get outside and just walk around. If nothing else, walk around and reconnect with God. And remember that when Jesus died, there's the hope in the resurrection. We too have resurrection. We'll be raised up, but we've got to be prepared. We've got to be ready for it. It's going to happen at some point. We better be prepared for it. If there's anybody this morning who has any prayer needs, or anybody who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on a baptism, we would encourage you to come up. Or I think one of our shepherds will be in the back. Isn't in the back? I don't know where. Maybe he went to the bathroom. Went downstairs. Okay. So you can come up. If you have any prayer needs, or if you'd like to be baptized, I'll be standing up front. Let's all stand and sing together.